You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Rea. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to another episode of Idea Collider. I'm delighted to be reacquainted with Marianne De Backer. We met a few years ago now, but I've been following Marianne's career with some excitement, watching her sort of taking on the world. Marianne, do you want to tell us a little more about you and about where you came from and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Hey, good to see you. Yes, so I'm Marianne De Backer. I'm the CEO of Vir Biotechnology. We are about a $1.5 billion market cap public company here in San Francisco, headquartered. I had a long career before becoming CEO of Vir in the pharma industry. I started actually more than 30 years ago at Janssen. I knew Dr. Paul Janssen when he was still there, and I started as a scientist, molecular biologist. I worked about 10 years in drug discovery, and then I did a rather drastic move into more, corporate and business. So I did an MBA in finance, and I went into, licensing and business development. And from there, I actually went on to lead a commercial business. So I launched 2 products in Europe, one in immunology, one in neuroscience. And then, further evolved my career in corporate development. I did a lot of M&A. And what has been driving me my entire career is bringing impact to patients. And I have been incredibly fortunate to do that in a lot of different ways.
Well, and I've always been impressed by J and what kind of culture they had there. I remember, when I created the Pharmaceutical Innovation Index, the first year we did it about 15 years ago, J&J came top. And the first message I got from anybody was from Paul Stoffels at J&J. And it wasn't just congratulating J&J and saying thank you. He was interested to know how to improve, the next year. So although they come top, he wanted to know how to do better the next year. And I thought, well, that's a great kind of culture to have and to inculcate into the people there.
Yes, absolutely. Continuous improvement thinking.
Absolutely. So Marianne, tell me more about Vir and what's the company based on? And you talked about this kind of huge year, this exceptional year going forwards. Tell me more about the technology and where you're going.
Sure. Yeah. So Vir Biotechnology was founded actually, it will be exactly 10 years this year. So, and Vir was incredibly successful during the COVID pandemic. You might have heard that together with GSK, Vir Bio was able to bring sotrovimab, or here in the United States called Xevudy, to market, and was able to actually save the lives of a lot of patients. The team here at Vir Bio was also very instrumental in coming up with an antibody therapeutic against Ebola that also went all the way to market. So this is a company that has quite a significant patient impact already. But what happened post the COVID pandemic actually is that, as you know, the SARS-CoV-2 viruses, evolved, new variants came up, and sotrovimab was no longer active. And so that meant that the company went from having like $1 billion in revenue in 1 year to almost having no revenue the next year. So that is something that very few companies survive, these kind of very drastic impact on your income. And so I was brought in exactly at that time when that was happening to sort of think about what, the company could be doing strategically going forward. And so I joined in April of 2023. And I have since then been building the company, building on its existing strengths of protein engineering and being really good at coming up with antibody therapeutics, also understanding how the immune system, the human immune system, fights infections, really building upon that, but then really pivoting the company into immuno-oncology and specifically immuno-oncology for solid tumors. Yeah. So what we have now is a pipeline of very advanced drug in registrational studies for hepatitis delta, but also 3 clinical stage assets, masked T-cell engagers for metastatic solid tumors.
Tell me more about your decision to become, CEO at Vir, during quite a challenging time. What was going through your head when you decided to join?
Yes, sure. So I left Johnson in 2019, and I actually first joined Bayer. I moved to Germany, I moved to Berlin, and I became a member of the executive team focused really on, finding innovation that could strengthen the R&D pipeline. And we were incredibly successful doing that. I mean, we entered into a partnership we actually acquired Candy Therapeutics, a company in UK that led to a drug that is already now on the market, Linqued, for menopause. We were able to acquire an oncology company, Vir Therapeutics, and a gene therapy company, Vir Bio, and we really built the pipeline to being very healthy. And it was during that time that I often was asked, why don't you become a CEO of a company yourself? Because of course, there's a lot of strategic thinking that goes into making those choices of what to acquire. And I had actually honestly not thought about that at all. So, but the seed was planted, and I thought, okay, yeah, why not? I have a lot of experience in R&D. I have a lot of experience on the business side. I've launched products. I have done a lot of M&A, corporate development, venture investing. So I thought that my experience palette would be suitable actually to potentially take a CEO role. And after making that known, the opportunity for Vir Biotechnology actually came pretty swiftly.
Well, and since then, have you had surprises? What's been the sort of biggest sort of takeaway from this role?
Yes, absolutely. Many surprises. So first of all, as I mentioned, I became CEO in April of 2023. And since then, we have had generally in the biotech sector a very difficult time, right? We have gone through a biotech winter. It has been a very tough environment, a very tough funding environment. A lot of companies had to downsize, had to, sometimes also close up shop. So, I mean, having worked my entire career at a large pharma company, you see the impact of economic downturns for sure, but it's not in the same way that you experience it when you're leading a biotech company yourself. So it's very personal, it's very direct, and it impacts you very directly. I also had to make, very difficult choices. I downsized the company with about, 1/3. I had to close down some sites. So again, it hits home very close. It's much more difficult than when you're sort of watching it from a distance. So that is one. The other one, for sure, I mean, the impact you can have on patients' life, I have always been motivated by that. That is really what brought me to my first role at Janssen. I wanted to make a difference for patients. And at a biotech company, and especially if you're leading it yourself, you're very, very close to that. I mean, every decision you make can make a difference for, when is something going to patients? How is it going to patients? So that is incredibly fulfilling. Again, I have always been incredibly fulfilled in my career at large pharma, but doing it in a smaller company where you have that direct impact is something very special. Yeah. And then third, I have learned very quickly that cash is king. You can have the best science and the best ideas in the world. You need to fund your operations, and you need to make sure that you have enough cash in the bank. So we have been working extremely hard in pivoting the company, getting the right science on board, doing partnerships that help us bring that right science internally, but now also really focusing in very hard on making sure that we have the funding to do what is needed to actually translate all that great science and patient impact.
Absolutely. Well, maybe let's talk about some of that pivoting. So, you just announced this deal with Astellas, the sharing, pretty compelling phase 1 data in advanced prostate cancer. What, with your technology, the kind of PRO-XTEN masking technology, accelerate, and redefine T-cell engagers in solid tumors, how does your partnership accelerate, getting to where you want to be?
Yes. So maybe taking a, small step back, why T-cell engagers,
Yep.
right? So we entered into a partnership back in September of 2024 with Sanofi, which gave us the opportunity actually to bring in 3 clinical stage masked T-cell engagers, and to your point, the ProXtend masking technology. We also brought in about 50 people that had all the knowledge around the technology, the assets, the manufacturing, etc. Now, why we were so excited about, specifically this technology. So You probably are very familiar. There's already, I think, 9 or 10 T-cell engagers on the market for, mostly hematologic tumors, so blood cancers. But in solid tumors, this modality has really been held back by toxicity.
Right.
So T-cell engagers are, bispecific molecules. They're like a portion of an antibody, so to make it very simple, that binds on the one hand the tumor-associated antigen on the cancer cell, and on the other hand binds the CD3 binding domain with the T cell. And so it brings the cancer cell and T cell in close proximity, so the T cells can get activated and actually do cancer-directed killing. That is incredibly powerful, because what you're basically doing is you don't need to take the immune cells out of the human body, modify them and place them back. No, you're just really using the T cells that are already present in the tumor or in the patient, and you try to activate them to recognize the tumor and start killing it. So if you can do that, it's incredibly powerful. But as I mentioned, in solid tumors, that had been very difficult up to now, because what typically happens is that those T-cell engagers also get activated in human healthy tissue. And when that happens, you get, cytokine release syndrome, you get, high level of toxicities. So, it had been very difficult to achieve any efficacy with an acceptable safety level for any, T-cell engager almost. So what we are doing with our ProXtend technology is we are masking the T-cell engager. You can imagine that you're sort of, putting a little bit of it's like a sponge-like structure around your T-cell engager. It's basically consisting of 2 hydrophilic polypeptide masks that are, bound to and covering really both the tumor-associated binding domain and the T-cell binding domain. So the T-cell engager is entirely engulfed. It's a little bit like a Trojan horse. You're covering up your, active molecule here, and only when it reaches the tumor microenvironment, then those masks are being cleaved off. There's proteases in the tumor that allow the linkers that we use to put the masks on to be cleaved off, and only in the tumor microenvironment, the T-cell engager is then basically unmasked, being unleashed, and can exert its activity. So it has, we showed the first result of our prostate cancer drug, a PSMA CD3 T-cell engager last week, with, very promising efficacy combined with a very, very tolerable and good safety profile.
Yeah.
So that is sort of the promise, that you can now really use T-cell engagers and deploy them to metastatic solid tumors. And that is why Astellas and other strategics was so interested in doing this partnership with us, even though the asset is, to your point, still only in phase 1.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the data look pretty compelling, certainly from the safety side, which has been, a challenge for the T-cell engagers. How does the kind of dual masking approach address those kind of key hurdles? And maybe go back to the kind of infectious disease immunology side. What did you learn from that side that's made a difference to oncology?
Yes. Yeah, so there's a number of things that you need to believe, right? The hypothesis is, as I mentioned, that your T-cell engager that is masked, that has this sponge around it, will just circulate in the bloodstream and nothing really will happen. Nothing will happen until, again, it reaches the tumor microenvironment, the mask is being cleaved off, and at that point, the T-cell engager becomes very active. It binds the tumor-associated binding domain, in this case, for a prostate cancer drug, PSMA in the tumor, and then it binds CD3 and it activates the T cells. And we have shown, your CRS, so your cytokine release syndrome, is really limited. You don't see a lot of target-specific toxicity, again, only very limited or low grade. And at the same time, you see very compelling efficacy. We were able, in a subgroup of efficacious dose, we were able to achieve 82% of the patients getting a PSA 50 response, 53% a PSA 90 response, and even 1 in 3 patients a PSA 99 response. So that is obviously great efficacy, but to your point, it's really important to marry that with much better safety, which we were able to do. And maybe just important also to mention, in this, subset of patients where we saw that great efficacy, we did not need to use prophylactic steroids or anti-IL-6 drugs that a lot of other T-cell engagers unfortunately have to do.
I'm interested actually in, you mentioned these kind of 50 people that came across, can you tell me about the kind of human dimension to the kind of, understanding how to work with drugs like that? Because you hear this a lot. I mean, there's a company called Arcus, which is working with TIGITs, and they seem to be able to do something with TIGITs that no one else is doing. And you go, well, that's interesting considering the body of literature is out there. People themselves, to have the key to unlock, some of these technologies.
Absolutely. There's always something like know-how, right? beyond just what is on paper. Yeah, I really strongly believe that bringing over those 50 employees from Sanofi, and most of those were actually prior Amunix employees. So Sanofi had acquired Amunix, a company here in South City, a couple of years earlier. And they were really the ones that, developed the technology. So we have the person here within Vir Bio that worked over 20 years to develop the ProXtend masking technology. So these things, like when we think about mRNA, right? These things take 15 to 20 years to develop. So similarly, we have the founder here of Amunix that worked his entire life really optimizing this technology. It doesn't come sort of one day to the next. The other thing is very important is we have people here who know everything about CMC and manufacturing of these molecules. I mean, these are unique molecules, right? They are T-cell engagers, but then, as I mentioned, they have these, hydrophilic masks that engulf them. So there's specificity on how you manufacture those. So there's a lot of know-how here that, again, I thought was really important. And then, of course, we have the people that have a deep passion actually for the clinical stage assets, who have been associated with the assets for some time and have sort of gradually seen the promise, but now see it really coming entirely to life. So yeah, I mean, having the human capital to be able to translate it, very important. And I would also say that marrying that human capital with the capabilities and the knowledge and the people that we already had at Vir Bio, and for example, are really good at protein engineering, using AI to come up with, really unique T-cell engagers. That allows us now to come up with an entire, new pipeline of masked T-cell engagers for solid tumors.
Yeah, which is kind of, I guess, my next question, because your ability to sort of plug and play in oncology is that's certainly part of the vision, I think, for the company. I know you got moves into HER2, you got moves into EGFR. So targeting, how do you see taking a kind of technology forwards across multiple tumor types? What's the kind of company strategy there?
Yes, I mean, that's really the beauty of the technology. So there's a lot of masking technologies out there, but it is the case for all of them that they need to design a new mask for every new target that they want to go after. So our technology, the ProXtend technology, is really plug and play. We can take exactly the same mask as we used for our prostate cancer drug, Vir 5500, and use it across our pipeline. So as you mentioned, we have a HER2 dual masked T-cell engager, an EGFR dual masked T-cell engager. They're both in phase 1, and monotherapy and combination therapy dose escalation is ongoing. And we have been able, as I mentioned, to really bring the capability and the skill sets and the passion of the people that were already at Vir Bio and the people that came in with the Sanofi alliance together to build that new pipeline. So we have now 7 new preclinical stage assets that actually have evolved rather swiftly. Again, using our capability to come up with antibodies very swiftly, but then also using our artificial intelligence engine, it's called DAISY, to come up with the best possible molecules from a potency perspective, but also from a developability perspective, from a manufacturability perspective, and so on. And then use the masking technology that we have, the ProXtend technology, bring that together and come up with these next generation really therapeutics for the treatment of metastatic solid tumors across a number of different indications.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to maybe your commercial experience as well, because a lot of biotechs now are basically looking at commercializing themselves instead of looking for a partner to do that, keeping hold of the kind of value that you've created in, as you say, manufacturing, taking these things to market. How do you see that kind of future for Vir? Are you going to be a standalone biotech, launching your own products?
Yeah, we absolutely have the ambition to be a sustainable commercial company again, right? So Vir Bio was that once, and we absolutely want to be that again. Our first opportunity to do so will actually be with our hepatitis delta program, which is already in registrational trials. And at JP Morgan just a couple of weeks ago, we shared, very compelling data where with our combination of drugs, it's an antibody and an siRNA, tobevibart and elebsiran, we could almost, 9 out of 10 patients after 96 weeks of treatment, we could no longer detect the virus in the patient's blood. So very compelling data. We are now fully in registrational trials. They are called Eclipse. It's a set of trials. And we're expecting data, the first set of data at the fourth quarter of this year. So that's very exciting. That will be our first opportunity to do so. Our plan is to commercialize it in the US, but we have entered into a partnership with a company called Norgine in Europe. So they're going to be our partner for Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. And then for our oncology pipeline, we absolutely have the ambition to become a commercial company in oncology as well. We have partnered our prostate cancer drug with Astellas. We have retained an option to co-promote in the US and a 50-50 profit split in the US. So that will allow us to build that first experience of commercializing our products also in the United States for oncology.
Yeah, well, and I'm aware John Maraganore was on this podcast talking about the Alnylam journey and how long it took with pivoting and collaborations and deals to get to the point of being profitable and that kind of sustainability built in. So clearly, there's a lot of new things to learn to get to that point. Does that keep you up at night, or is that a part of the challenge?
I mean, our ambition is to really make a difference for patients. Again, I have a more than 30 years career before joining Vir Bio at large pharma. I have launched drugs myself. It absolutely doesn't, keep me up. I just want to make sure, because we're a small company, we're a small team, there's a lot to be done. I think what is most important is that, we set the right priorities, we make very smart choices. We keep a very close eye on our cash so that we can, translate all that great ambition and great innovation into real impact for patients. Over the course of the past few months, since December, we were able to secure, a little bit more than $500 million of upfront, income through your point. It's often a mix of a lot of things. It was an Norgine deal, the Astellas deal. We also did a financing that brought in about $173 million. So, really making sure that we have the fuel to translate all the innovation into impact for patients. That's really our core focus.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly biotech, you mentioned, it's not as bad as it was, but the kind of landscape for biotech's still uncertain. And I mean, I personally believe that the future is in biotech is, the kind of diversity of approaches, diversity of technologies in biotechs, far outperforms the large companies. And if they can stay solo, I think it's a really exciting period ahead. But, with the, what kind of challenges do you see for the biotech industry in general?
Yeah, so first of all, I think there's a phenomenal symbiosis between biotech and large pharma, right? There's a lot of, innovation that gets generated within biotech that, gets translated further with, the help of large pharma. So I think it's, together, but the biotech and the large pharma companies are, generating all that impact for patients. For biotech companies these days, we see, some really positive signs. As you've seen this year, there's been, certainly more IPOs. There's been quite a number of financings. There's been a number of M&As. There's more deal making. So I think there's a lot of sort of, indicators that show you that things are on the up for biotech and that it's a different year from last year. I have to admit, at JP Morgan of last year, I felt very optimistic too. I thought
Right.
we had turned a corner
Yeah.
and we were going to be in a different time. It didn't happen that way. Now, again, I'm actually feeling very optimistic, and I think the signs are maybe a little bit deeper and longer lasting. I hope that's going to really translate into more belief into, again, the value that biotech brings. We really need to, draw more investors back to biotech. There's a lot of impact to be gained here. Again, not just for patients, but also for shareholders.
Yeah.
So I'm actually very optimistic. I see a lot of great signs that, bring fuel to an industry segment that can bring tremendous innovation to the healthcare industry.
With biotech and pharma, a lot of the value sits in predictability, right? So, there will be a market there. If we get there, we'll get paid, and the regulatory landscape's going to be a key, predictable environment when we're going to get there. How do you feel about, the last year in terms of the FDA, in terms of the approach to companies that you've seen?
Yes, so I was part of a group of biotech CEOs that met with Dr. Mike Rea.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to understand that we are, in a competitive environment, a global competitive environment. And I was very heartened to understand and hear that is understood. And that, we need to create an environment where we are not going to be lagging behind what is possible in other countries. So I'm really hopeful that we will see more and more change that will help us to move, faster, swifter in certain, across certain regulatory processes.
Yeah.
I can only speak from experience now directly in our own clinical stage programs. We have orphan drug designation in Europe, but we have fast track designation here in United States for a hepatitis delta regimen. So we are in very frequent contact with the FDA, and we haven't really seen, any changes. I mean, there's a very healthy dialogue. We get a lot of good advice. We're moving our program along. So, from our personal experience, there's really not have been any, severe changes in any direction at this time. We also are in contact regarding our oncology programs, and again, the same there. So from personal experience, I cannot really comment on anything that might have changed.
Okay. So that sounds broadly positive as well, as that, I think my impression is that the threat from China has been felt and responded to, certainly in the US at least. I don't think Europe is close to getting its head around that yet, but that kind of positivity, I think, is feeding through to the US biotech space, and the investors are coming in. I'm interested, since you mentioned this kind of, taking on the job of CEO and making sure that, cash is king. You've got this very broad portfolio of kind of infectious disease oncology. What kind of balance do you see in day-to-day decision making at Vir?
Yeah, I mean, so as you know, in all aspects of life these days, you have to talk about AI. And the same is true here. I mean, we are speeding up our drug discovery process quite significantly using AI. So, we first generate antibodies in animals, but then the next step, again, allows us to iterate and do these continuous improvement loops now using, AI, different tools. And that is phenomenal to see. I mean, we have some of the best, protein engineers in the world, but the sort of, suggestions that you get from AI as to what molecules, what therapeutics to consider, it's exciting to see. And it allows us, to move faster. So in everything we do in drug discovery, I think our day-to-day decisions there, they are different, and they move, at a different speed because of, some of that technology. I also am hopeful, we are not there yet, but I also am hopeful that AI is going to help us to better understand, who are the responders in our trials. I mean, we see phenomenal response, if you look at our prostate cancer dual masked T-cell engager, as you can see, it's really phenomenal response. It's early, but, very promising. But what if we could really predict what kind of patients are going to be respond to your drug, right? And we're fortunately, it seems, not there yet. I do hope that, technology will evolve and will allow us to do that so we can make better decisions. It will be better for patients, and it's obviously also going to be better for where, certain drugs are going to be deployed. And it's going to protect patients from not being exposed to drugs that they don't need. So I think in all aspects, actually, of healthcare, I'm really hopeful that AI is going to make a difference. 40% of the trials that we do in the larger biopharma industry fail because we do not understand the biology well enough. Also, there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot that I think AI can contribute. So I really do think that we will make hopefully better and faster decisions going forward as a result of some of these developments.
Nice. And you mentioned, protein scientists and others. Do you see in Vir this kind of bottom-up request for more AI, or because some companies are already approaching it from a top-down perspective, sort of driving it down, but you're, I think, probably describing a different situation in your company.
Yeah, we do both because we want everyone, to use the power of AI in their day-to-day work. So we have people where, it comes very natural, like our scientists, they embrace this and it comes very natural. And maybe it's, a bottom-up, type of movement. But we actually also started a top-down mindset change initiative a number of months ago, where we want everyone to embrace AI. I mean, everything you do these days, you can win so much, get more insight, do things faster, so yeah, it is in both directions.
And maybe a question about culture, because, I knowing you, I'd be interested in your kind of management of an active culture here. Do you see that as a sort of differentiator for the company? And is it and how hands-on are you with, managing the culture of the company?
Yeah, I'm pretty hands-on, I would say. So it's incredibly important. So again, we went through a difficult time as a company where we had to, post the COVID success, really look at what are we really unique in and what is it that we no longer need to do. And so that meant, actually closing down quite a number of programs, saying goodbye to people, building a new management team, and to your point, also think about what the culture needed to be successful in the future. And so we really galvanized around a number of themes. Grit is incredibly important. I mean, there was there are times where things are easy. This was not a time. It was going to be a tough time where everyone would have to stand up, roll up their sleeves, and get work done. And that's not for everyone, right? That, requires a certain type of people. So grit was a very important value that we introduced that, was crucial for our success. We also introduced ingenuity because we wanted people to really not just do what they had always done, but think, can we do things differently? Can we do it better, faster? So ingenuity is an important element. And then the others are maybe, you can find more often is collaboration. We cannot get things done if people do not, collaborate and keep an eye on the outcomes. That's, what is it that as a company or as a team we want to achieve and how we're going to do that together. And then finally, authenticity. We want people to just, say what they think and, be authentic here in the company.
Yeah. And I got a sense from you as well that you're in the weeds with them at the same time. So it's much easier to lead if you believe in the leader as you go through those moments.
Yeah, I very strongly believe that as a leader and also as a CEO, you obviously, need to lead strategically, and then you're here, you're very high up. But depending on the topic, you need to be able to go really deep and understand an issue, especially if it can be determinant for something happening to your company or to your program, right? So I think being able to sort of, move up and down as a leader, I think is really important.
Yeah. A couple of sort of maybe left field questions. What drives you outside of Vir? What are your interests?
Yeah, so I'm incredibly passionate about what I do at Vir Bio, and I spend a lot of time here, to be honest. But I also really enjoy the outdoors. So I do a lot of hiking. I'm very fortunate to live here on the California coast. And so that is something that I very much enjoy.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, and maybe my last question is just, 26 looks like an exciting year in terms of outcomes. What have you got to look forward to for the rest of this year?
Yes, so the first quarter has already been that, dramatically exciting. So we're happy with the announcement of the prostate cancer data, the Astellas partnership, the financing we did. So next catalyst coming up is we're going to have clinical data for a next dual masked clinical stage program. We also, as I mentioned, going to have data from our hepatitis program in the fourth quarter of this year. And we're going to start our expansion cohorts actually already for our prostate cancer program in the next quarter. So it's going to be, again, a busy but very enjoyable year.
Well, to keep it across. So when you get to JP Morgan next year, it becomes even more of an event. Marianne, thank you so much for sharing, really what's part of the remarkable, exciting fabric of biotech at the moment. It's everywhere you look, every corridor you go down, there's a new, something that's going to transform things, and you've articulated that really well. So thank you very much for joining me.
It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.